Hi everyone, it's Jeanette here from the Sewing Studio, and I've been getting some projects done actually. I've got several quilt tops, I think 6 or 7, possibly 8, that are in the stack waiting to be quilted. So I've been doing this one, this is next on the list, and it's the broken dishes quilt we did a little while back. And they've decided here we're going to donate this to charity. So I'm finishing this off so that we can do that. And I thought I would share the quilting technique with you all, because we quite often get questions on there saying, oh, can we have some more ideas of how to quilt on your home sewing machine? Now, I do all of my quilting on my own home sewing machine because I don't have a long arm and I don't have access to a long armour. And I enjoy doing it. So I came up with this little idea. I'm sure it's not an original idea. I'm sure there are other people out there that have done either this pattern or something very similar. But I just came up with this, something a little bit different. Now, I don't actually know if there's a name for this quilt pattern. I'm sort of thinking it looks a bit like an argyle, where you've got sort of like the diamonds. And what I've done, and what I'm going to show you, is I'm doing sort of 4 lines of stitching, so 3 rows that are 3/4 of an inch apart, and then I'm leaving a 3-inch gap, and then I'm doing that again. So it's 3 3/4, then 1 3-inch, and I'm doing it like a cross hatch. So I've gone all in one direction of the quilt, and now I'm going back in the other direction. And if you can see under the close-up here, it's beginning to form this pattern where you've got these small squares where everything intersects. You've got some lines of quilting here, and then you've got these larger squares. So it just gives a nice sort of different, interesting look to the quilt that's different to just the normal crosshatch where we sort of keep everything equally spaced. So I thought I would share that with you. And actually, if I just move the border over a little bit more, you can probably see the pattern there forming a little bit more there in the border. So, but before I finished it, I've left a corner unquilted so I can show you all what I've been doing. Now, I've decided to just do an all-over pattern on this one because, you know, I've got to get 6 or 7 more quilts quilted as well. So I just need to get this off the list. And it's fairly quick and simple. It's not too difficult, but actually I'm really liking the result. I'm really liking how this is coming out. I think it suits the pattern of the broken dishes because we've got those angles in there anyway. So I think it just all goes really well together. So less chatting, let's get over and do some sewing. We're going to be using the walking foot, and I'm also going to be using the quilting guide on the walking foot. So I'll show you how I've done that. But that's really useful. You don't have to have the quilting guide, but it saves a lot of time because I only ever had to draw 2 lines, one in one direction and one in the other. And I'm working off that line with the quilting guide. So it saves a lot of time having to mark all your quilt out ahead of time. The other thing I'm going to be using is my quilting gloves. I find that if I put my gloves on, I get a bit more grip and a bit more control over the quilt. And also I find if I don't wear my gloves, my hand, particularly this one, starts to ache after a while. So I can quilt for a little bit longer if I'm wearing my gloves, as well as it giving me a bit more control. So I'm going to be putting my quilting gloves on. So let's go to the machine and let's get quilting. So I'm here at the camera. Now the first thing just to say about the walking foot, I put my walking foot on. Now this one just sort of slots into the back. You undo that screw and then just make sure you do that screw up nice and tight. I was doing a workshop the other day actually, and somebody's foot almost dropped off because as it was sort of working, the movement of the machine was sort of undoing the screw. So make sure that's done up nice and tight. The other thing to say is I've also put a quilting needle in. There are different types of needle. This is a quilting needle and it's a size 90. Now I did have a quilting needle in it at home, which was a 75, and it started to skip stitches, which says to me that needle wasn't quite robust enough to get through all the layers. And the quilting needles are designed to do that. They're a bit stronger and they're designed to punch through the wadding as well as the 2 layers of fabric. So they are worth the investment. You may get a better result if you put a quilting needle in. As I said, I'm going to put my gloves on. Now the other thing to say is just about the quilting guide. It's a little bar that looks like this. Now this bit may be on the right hand side or it may be the left. You can get left or right handed sided ones. And there's just a little hole in the back of the walking foot that just pushes into. So we can see that there, and you can move that in and out, and we can gauge our spacing by lining that up. Now to do that, because I've already got some quilting lines on here, I'm going to measure off one of the lines and move my needle and my foot. Now I've got to find the corner that's not quilted, and it's going to be the last one I get to, isn't it? Nope. a quilt quilt does only have 4 sides, surely. Is it this one? Yes, I think I went all the way round and still missed it. Yeah. So if I put that in under the camera, you can see I've done all the lines in one direction and I'm now going in the other direction. So what I'm going to do, my last line I did was 3 inches apart from my previous quilting line. So I now need to do 3 rows that are 3/4 of an inch apart. And I just worked out, to determine the spacing, I actually just drew it out on a piece of paper to something that looked the right proportion for what I wanted to do. So there was no sort of science involved in it, really. So to gauge where that needs to be, I'm just going to sort of position my needle just sort of touching the fabric on a previous quilting line, and then I can move my guide so that it sits on that quilting line there. So I know any quilting lines I do now are going to be a consistent 3/4 of an inch apart. Now you could measure that with a ruler, but because I've already got some quilting lines in there, I'm just going to measure off what I've already done. So I'm going to move this across now to here. And, sorry, it needs to be the other way round. Let's do this without losing the corner again. Oh, there it is. So I need to keep it going that way. So my bar is going to go across a previously quilted line, like so, and then my needle now is going to be 3/4 of an inch away. So I start a little way back onto the wadding. I've got my stitch length set at a 3.0. That tends to be sort of my standard, either a 3.0 or a 3.5 is tend to be what I quilt with. Now I'm just going to have to take a few stitches and then I'll just manage the rest of this quilt. So let's just get started. Now I'm going to put my gloves on. Let's just now, I'm just going to fold this quilt up. Now I'm lucky on this machine, it's got a nice big throat. And then I'm going to stop every so often and just manage the quilt and push it through. And I'm going to put my gloves on because, like I say, it stops this hand in particular, gets quite achy from sort of holding onto the quilt. But I find with the gloves, it does stop my hands getting so tired. And now we're just going to take our time and get this done. Now, just to say, my eyes are focusing on that bar because all the needle is doing is going up and down, so that's not moving anywhere. So I'm just keeping my eye on this bar, just making sure I'm running along and making sure that everything's staying nice and flat as I feed it through the machine. And I'm going to do that for another 2 rows. So that's my 4 rows together. My check is that I've got 4 lines of stitching there. And once I know that, my next gap here now is going to be 3 inches. So I'm going to do the same again. Now I'm going to need to move my needle all the way over to the left because I think this quilt bar only just gets to the 3 inches. Now, if yours doesn't, you can draw the 3-inch lines on and just use your quilting guide for the narrow ones. But there we are. Now I've got my 3 inches and I can do my next line. So that's my wide one. So I can go back now again and do my 3 more rows of the narrower together. So I'm just going to carry on going until I get to the end of the quilt, and then I'll meet you back in the centre. Right, I've finished my 4 quilting lines there, and I'm just going to do a little bit there just to help hold that down. Now it should be held quite well because there is a line of stitching that's going that way, but I do like to just stitch that corner piece in. You probably won't see that, that will probably end up under the binding, so, but it just makes sure that everything stays nice and flat. So we've finished. So that's the corner we've just finished quilting. So we've carried on the pattern, and I just do my visual check just to make sure I've definitely got all my 4 lines of stitching in before I've moved on, but you can see the texture that that's adding there to the quilt. So it's a really nice simple one. It's fairly quick. Now anytime I'm doing the quilting, I do tend to do what I call chunking it down. So I don't sort of sit there and think, right, I'm going to spend all day quilting this. I get a bit bored, if I'm honest. So I tend to just sort of quilt for an hour, possibly 2 at the most, and then sort of go and do something a little bit more interesting. And I'll just do that over sort of several days until it's done. But I think on this one, as well as that, I think it's a couple of mornings work on it, and it's all been done. So there it is, all finished. My next bit on this now will be to trim it all up and add the binding. But I hope you've enjoyed that as another little idea of just quilting with a straight stitch on your sewing machine. So anything that anybody out there can do. You know, just try to stay as straight-ish as possible. I mean, if you look at some of my lines, they're not dead straight, but overall you just see the texture. I always say to people, you know, we see sort of the slight imperfections when we're actually quilting it because we're right on top of it, but we never really get that close to it again. So hopefully this will keep somebody nice and warm at some point in the future. So as I said, I need to get this finished and then we can donate it to a charity. So thank you for that. If you do give this quilting pattern a go, please do share your photos with us. We're on Facebook and on Instagram, so if you tag us in that, we can get to see them. Also, you can email them directly to us here. So we really do like to see what you guys are doing out there and how your quilting is coming along. So thank you for your time today, and do join us again here next time in the Sewing Studio.